series of these interviews that have been going on that have been so exciting. And I've been blessed with the wonderful, chore of bringing in top educators from around the world. We started out a couple of weeks ago with Klaus Hessler. Last week we had Klaus was from Germany. Last week we had Jeff Salem from Canada, from the Toronto area. And today we've got Garey Williams from the west coast of the U.S. in the Seattle area. Garey, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Dom, for having me. I look forward to this. Looking forward to it.
This is great, Garey. This goes out globally. We've got people all around the world that are starting to log in right now, that are coming to see what's happening. And this is really about an educator spotlight. What Sabian does, which is so well with their vision of education, and this comes from Andy, the president, at the top of the game. He gets it. He sees the fact that we need to empower these teachers, and by doing that, we need to feature them and let them share a lot of the successes that they're having with their teaching business, especially now that all of this now is done online. Right. And the great thing about what we do with Sabian is that we've had Christian Steinke, who is the artist relations based out of the West Coast in California. He has sat down with great artists like Mike Portnoy and Chad Smith. My gosh, there's been some great conversations from these great artists. And Joe Bergamini, who is head of the SEN, the Sabian Education Network program, who is brilliant at what he does. He manages this website of SabianEd.com. And what this is, through the Sabian Education Network, is close to 5,000 teachers worldwide that are joining in, that are incredibly excited about being a part of this journey of focusing our brain power of education worldwide. So, Garey, that's why you're here right now. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Garey, fill me in a little bit now. You've been teaching for how long?
It's about 36 years now, I think. I started my sophomore year in college and have been doing it ever since.
So safe to say, you've had some experiences in teaching that gives you a little bit of the edge of understanding what to do with a student and how to guide them, right?
Definitely.
Tell me about what you've experienced in the change now by teaching online as opposed to in person. Tell me about how that's felt in doing that.
Well, at first I was skeptical. In fact, it was you that made me introduced to doing a Skype session. I was really blown away by how clear the communication was. It was just like sitting across the table at the NAM show talking with you. Yeah. And so I tried it with some students because I decided to relocate and I didn't want to lose them. And it worked out really good. And some of the advantages that presented themselves was the fact that I could see the other students' drum set. And normally they can't bring their drums to the lesson. So this way I can help them with setup, tuning, all kinds of things. And I can usually hear what's going on without even seeing it. So my ear has gotten that refined where I can kind of tell if they're mashing the beat or releasing it. They're holding the stick too tight when they're striking things. But it's been really good to have that connection with them. And I've literally tuned a whole drummer's drum set in a Skype lesson before with great success. So it's been fantastic. I think in some ways it's better for drummers because they can play their drum set. I get a chance to actually help them with their setup and their sound.
Garey, this is fantastic that you have this kind of an open mind, that you're embracing this kind of technology. This is totally where the 21st century is at. As I tell people, we are in the 21st century, and what's important is we are now in the second decade of the 20th century. So we've now moved into this whole nother world of technology that we're embracing. And of course, now with this pandemic that is happening, this really allows us to reach people. Another thing too is that when a student has to drive to a lesson, the 15 or 20 minutes or a half an hour of that drive each way, now I tell them what you're saving on the drive to and for the lesson, that's extra practicing time.
Yes.
So we're really giving them the lesson and then a chance to be able to embody them, to have them grow by having more time.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's also the effect where they're warmed up, ready to go, and then right after the lesson's done, bam, they can continue practicing. And so there is no delay to getting on with what they want to do. And what's really also helpful is that I can see kind of the work environment. Students, sometimes when they come to my studio, they'll act like they're coming to your studio. And then when they go home, they're just doing their own thing. And this is something I've experienced a lot with my students since they've been on lockdown, is they're trying to figure out how to organize all this, quote, extra time because they're not in classroom shuffling between one class to the next. So it's really been good for me to be able to help them come up with what I call a well-balanced practice plan. Like a well-rounded human would have, science, math, history, English, all these subjects. And so we try to break that down, make a list of technique, coordination exercises, reading exercises, playing along with musical tracks. So I'm really a proponent on organizational skills, which is why I wrote that article, How to Practice, which was published in Modern Drummer twice and Percussive Notes once. And I think management skills are very, very important to become successful. And we're people first, players second. So I always try to focus on getting connected to the person behind the player to see their mind, their thinking, their methods of organization, and how I can help them become better at practicing and organizing their practice time, their schedule. So I can do that more effectively in some ways when they're at home, because they have to write the stuff down themselves. I can't just write it in their planner for them. So they take a little bit more responsibility for making it happen. So it's been empowering for them, actually.
What's happened, Gary, what you're just saying, first of all, you're a very organized person. I've known you for many, many years. So your organization, your personal skills, and how you've amped up your organizational skills, that continues to grow. And now you've been able to pass that on by having those skills to the students. And it's exactly right. You're giving the student more involvement, responsibility. Yes. They're now more accountable for the lesson because they're writing down what they want to work on.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. When I had Klaus Hessler from Germany, and these guys are all on here, and Jeff Salem is on here, Brian Fraser-Moore has joined us. Brian is a fantastic drummer who is so skilled, and he's been on tour with the biggest acts in the world, but still, he's a student of the art form, and he's still learning and still pushing himself, and that's what we need to do. We need to learn how to push ourselves. So are you working on anything on yourself personally now on drums? What are you working on to improve Gary Williams?
I'm actually observing drummers. I do a lot of reaction videos on my Drum Set Artistry YouTube channel now, where I do play-by-play talk down of these great players. And so through that and request of some of the, I have over 10,000 followers now. I'm getting lots of suggestions for people to do reaction videos to, especially my analysis. So I'm not just oohing and awing. I'm actually stopping the video and talking about what rudiments, what hand-foot patterns they're doing. So it's kind of opened me up to some new ideas, which has been inspiring. I've just consumed so much material in my life. I did all my rudiments by the time I was a sophomore, and I went through advanced techniques for the modern drummer before I even started college. Been through New Breed. I've been through all these books. So I've just been an eternal student of wanting to learn more and more and more. So this is one way I get exposed to new drummers. And it's mostly at this point, it's musical ideas. There's a few mechanic things that I'm still wanting to refine and develop my playing. But for the most part, I feel good about that level. I'm always just seeking inspiration musically from other drummers. So that's what I'm working on now. There's more ideas.
Bob, if you would, this is so great, Gary. Talk about the understanding of how to analyze something and how to step into a deeper understanding of drawing education from viewing these artists.
Well, what I try to do is just simplify what seems very complicated. And when I analyze this stuff, it's really hard to give you how I do it, other than it's so many years of listening. And this is something I did with my private students all the time. They would bring in or send me links to YouTube videos or recordings and ask me to listen and figure out what the drumming was. So many, many, many years, way back, was starting with Journey and Neil Peart with early Rush albums. I started transcribing these drummers playing. And so my ear got really good at picking things out. And of course, all the study in the books and the more advanced drummers. And I used to have stacks of videos. I don't know if many drummers go through all these videos. It's kind of overwhelming with the data that's online, and they select songs and not really go through records like we used to when we were young. Yeah. So it's just a lot of an accumulation of knowledge. And so I just try to take advantage of what comes up for me and just share what I can to help other drummers understand how these great players are doing what they're doing.
I just had a call yesterday with Panos Vasiliopoulos, who was a phenomenal drummer in Greece. And he is a great videographer, and he understands the technique of videoing and posting these videos. And he really kind of embraces technology. And I learned from him because when I watch his videos, I mean, he's got drones he uses. He's a brilliant photographer and a phenomenal drummer. So it's the combination, I guess, of being able to bring in all these skills together, which you have done so well. You've brought in so many skills all together, and you use them so well with your teaching.
Thank you. Yes. Well, it's a lot of education. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in performance, and I taught at a university for 2 years where I taught the percussion methods course that band directors take. So it got me really in tune with what directors know and don't know, which led to the writing of my second book, Drummer's Guide to Big Band. From going out and doing so many of these darn clinics, I could see what the directors didn't understand, because in my college, we did a quarter system, and you would only have 2 days to talk about drum set. 2 days. Right. It's like, there's no way they would know this. So getting out and working with the directors and seeing what's going on helped me to understand better exactly what these students needed.
Boy, talk about the book, because the book is available through Alfred, Wisdom Media publishes the book, but also it's available through hudsonmusic.com digitally, where people can bring this down faster so they can, prevent the mail challenge and just kind of bring this thing digitally. It's a whole new world now. Just talk about the book, because it's got some really great stuff, and I'm working with several students on it right now. Talk about some of the patterns and some of the setups for the figures. It's a beautiful book.
Well, basically, I had this amazing education from this gentleman named John Mallett, who was my jazz studies educator in college. And in fact, at Central Washington University, Peter Erskine at one time was considering getting his master's degree and coming to that school. The great Garey Hobbs, that played with the Steinke Orchestra in the late 70s, was at Central under John Mallett's instruction. So he just sat down. He was a professional drummer and played for me almost every day, it seemed like, for the first 2 years. And I'd already been through a lot of coordination books and knew all my rudiments. So my mechanical skills were fairly high, but my musical knowledge was pretty low. Even though I was in jazz band for a while, I wasn't really into jazz music as much as just, this is the group I could play my drum set. But that changed, because as he sat down and played, I could just sit down and copy. It was monkey see, monkey do. And so in my video or my book, I have 99 DVD tracks for that very reason. How helpful it was for me to see this man sit down and play, and then I just sit down and copy him, because so much of it's easier to understand when you see it in action. And then, of course, you can look at the transcription, you can listen to the audio recording, but we learn to talk before we learn to read. So I'm really trying to approach presenting this information visually, auditorily at first. And of course, I always stress the importance of learning to read, but there's so much to this book that really is influenced by John Mallett's instruction about kicking the band, setups, all the different ways to read charts, study the ink. And there's a bunch of his fun quotes in there. And another important teacher that had a huge impact on me was Jeff Hamilton, who wrote the foreword to this book. And I studied with Jeff for a few years, and he wanted me to quit school and go on the road when I was just like too young, and it just was too scary. And I ended up getting married and having a child, so that changed my interest in touring and that kind of stuff. But in here, I go through the chart reading checklist, where I talk about what you do when you get handed a chart. First thing you do is you got to know what the style is, what the tempo is, what the dynamic is. The second thing is the major repeat signs, where it starts, where it stops. From count off to cut off, you can never space out, as my college professor would say. And then the third area is the ink, where you get into section figures and ensemble figures. So I've actually put together a bunch of basic snare drum and kick drum setups. But then after that, I have a page, my favorite page in the book, is where I go through these 16 different setups that you can kind of see. And I've used terms that drummers know, like flams, drags, ropes, and, some of them are slang jazz terms like the dump, and some of the kind of weird words we use in the musical community to sort of describe a sound, sort of. But so all of this is laid out here, and it's written for educators as well as drummers, because the educators don't know what's going on. And this last summer, I went and did this conference with over 400 teachers in Ashland, Oregon, and they all bought this book, because I said, you're not expected to know all this stuff. If a student has to play a tune with a bossa nova group, that's in here. So I got jazz grooves, shuffle grooves, brush patterns, Latin grooves, the ones that are the more common ones that I've come across in some big band books. Plus there's like 5 full-length big band charts that I played on with 2 different professional big bands in Seattle, with and without the drums. So you really get a chance to be walked step by step, pretty much handheld, spoon-fed on how to go about this process, and then eventually get to the point where you can actually play the full-length tunes. And I even have some high school directors that are purchasing this book and requiring their students to go through some of the material, because I teach at a jazz camp, and I use this book's recordings to audition and play students in the different levels of the ensembles. And it's been really, really effective and becoming much more popular. More and more directors and college pedagogues are recommending it. The percussion teachers now are requiring this. Local university, 2 jazz studies educators are requiring this book, because they want their students that are going to go out and teach to have a clue. Because I had 5 band directors in the 4 years I was in high school. They kept quitting. So if it wasn't for my interest in wanting to continue, and teachers, and then the college up the street, which had this great jazz program, I might not have hung in there. But I was just too addicted to drumming to ever stop.
So think about what happened. You got involved, you weren't necessarily into jazz in the beginning stage, but all of a sudden playing jazz, and whether it's small group or big band, it started to suck you in. And once it draws you in, you're hooked for life, because jazz really opens up that market of any other style of music. Listen, John Bonham was a great jazz drummer. We don't think of him as a jazz drummer, but it was his jazz influence of his two favorite drummers, which was Joe Morello and Buddy Rich. What he took from them, he applied with Zeppelin. So you got to really kind of open your mind to a certain degree. And that's where that book helps out. When I take my students through that, who are necessarily not jazz enthusiasts, it hooks them into jazz, and they start to see the advantage. And just like you said about reading charts, listen, when you look at a chart, you got to look where the repeat sign's on, where the coda is, where some of the important figures are, where the solos are, dynamic. So there's a lot to be able to be informed, and that's what the book helps with.
Definitely, definitely. And part of it is, I mean, I had a romance with it, but, you know, I was growing up with the music of my time, but my father was a big fan of big band. And so he would crank the Stan Kenton albums really loud. And he listened to some Frank Sinatra. He would sing along. So I always had some big band music going on ever since before I actually started playing. In fact, he would take me to the college jazz night concerts they have once every quarter. And I just remember being so little, I would fall asleep, and he'd carry me out to the car at the end of the gig. So here I am as a young kid watching this. In fact, when I was in 7th grade, I was taken to go see Buddy Rich. And that was like a magic show. I'll still never forget that concert, ever. You know how it is. Those first initial events are so inspiring and really motivating lifelong.
That is beautiful. Well, again, all of these influences are fantastic. Talk about the Hi-Hat Foot book. Sure.
Yeah, this book was my first book, and it's actually based on a really large book I wrote, God, many years ago in the early 90s. I had, I can't even remember what it was called. I think it was Drum Set Essentials, and then Peter Erskine ended up using those titles. And my book was too long, and with your suggestion, I broke it down into smaller bites. But one of the big things that every drummer seems to be ignoring is that fourth limb, you know, especially when you come from playing rock stuff or just mainly hi-hat, kick, and snare. And so as I started studying other great drummers, one drummer that comes to mind was Omar Hakim. When I watched his playing with Weather Report and the Mike Manieri Quartet and New York, and then especially with Sting's playing, as I followed his drumming with Sting, he always played the 8th notes with the left foot on the hi-hat. And that was something I spent a lot of time working on. Weckl comes around, he's splashing quarters. So I really wanted to perfect that. So I realized that besides 2 and 4, which is common in jazz, and maybe quarter notes, there's these off beats you can play. And so I decided to really sit down and come up with a plan to develop 2 and 4 hi-hat pulses, 1 and 3 hi-hat pulses, quarter notes, 8th notes, and then off beats or the ends of each beat. And so when the students go through this stuff, they really understand the dance of their footing. Like we spend so much time with stickings, we got to get footings going. And so this book really helps organize not only the motion of when the heel's coming down and the right foot striking, or if it's a dropping the leg motion. So I really get into the different techniques to produce different sounds. Because if you play with holding the heel up, you get a very tight sound. If you lower your heel, you loosen it up. And a lot of drummers could do a lot more. Hi-hat's probably my favorite part of the drum set. And eventually I'll do a video on Mr. Hi-Hat.
Yeah, for sure. Give me an example of that. Just give me a quick example of something out of the book and how you apply some of the hi-hat movement.
Oh, sure. So if I'm doing some basic rock beat, I'll put it on the ride, and I'll rock the hi-hat foot.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So that variation of using that left foot or the hi-hat foot, if you're a lefty, obviously you're a weaker foot, your right foot, but that really kind of opens up a whole nother variation of giving more, I guess, more responsibility to our weaker limb.
Definitely. Yes. It kind of introduces you to more advanced stuff when you get into soloing too, where I spent quite a bit of time in the early 90s working on these like 6 hand-foot patterns, a lot of it influenced by some of the Dave Weckl instruction on The Next Step, his second video back. With the hi-hat always keeping time, and I used a drum machine. I would program these sequences with bass lines. Instead of just always a metronome, which I used forever. I still have my Dr. Beat over here. It doesn't work quite right. But I used metronomes for years. And then I went through all these different things with time placement, like Gavin Harrison's book, Rhythmic Illusions, through that a couple of times. And just to really have something that's built-in metronome, the time sources I referred to the left foot. So then the other appendages can be more free to improvise. And so starting with just basic timekeeping patterns when you're grooving is a more musical approach to begin with, and then you can expand that into improvisation.
Interesting, boy, very, very interesting. So with your students, you'll take them through pretty much a curriculum of movement that they have to better understand.
That's exactly it. It's all about movements. It's sound movements. And so that's really, I mean, that's kind of esoteric, but when you're in this industry, as we have been for so many years, you really just can step back and assimilate it all in that basic concept. It's always about a musician, and we can be drummers, but there's a difference. You know, musician understands melody, harmony, and rhythm, and that's where I went and got all this education in school and learned about arranging and in theory and all these things. Though I'm not actively doing that, I'm more interested in working with drummers as a drummer pedagogue than I am as an arranger and that kind of stuff. That knowledge is helpful, especially for like tuning intervals on the drums and stuff. So those are the things I try to help students get to where they want to go. It's really what do you want to learn and how can I help you learn it is my teaching philosophy, and that's how I approach things. So much out there.
Well, that's brilliant because it works. You have produced some phenomenal students, and you continue to produce some phenomenal students. What's amazing. So what's also I loved is many of the recordings that I heard you perform on. Your cymbal sounds always sound great. You know how to really pair and blend, you know, these wonderful metal sounds that Sabian makes. You bring them all together.
Yes, I love cymbals. I have a cymbal fetish forever. I don't know what happened, but I got so deeply into cymbals. A couple of experiences really opened me up to some different aspects of cymbal playing and cymbal sounds. And when I got really hooked on jazz, I became a jazz snob for a couple of years and was going to be a bebop snob and didn't listen to anything else. So I got way into some old Kay Zildjians, and I found one made in Turkey. And I realized the only way I could play it is to play it really light with a particular drumstick, a Bunkin stick. You told me, Bunny and Ken, that original company that was a Maplewood Joey Vespa or something model. And it was very light. And I was playing with a guy who was 1, 2, 1, 2, and people are sitting right there. So I had to learn to play really soft. I'd been studying with Jeff Hamilton, so I learned his method of playing the ride and all his brush stuff. And then the other thing was hi-hats. I found some hi-hats on an old, 1930s kit that were Kay Zildjian, but they were so thin that if you stomped them too hard, the top cymbal might flip back. But they sounded beautiful if you played them really light. So I could only really play those with the heel down, and it worked in this soft club. So that started getting me really thinking about weights, and then talking with Jeff Hamilton and learning from different sounds from these different great drummers. And the key was Mark Love, because as I started going to the NAMM show, I became really pretty acquainted with Mark. And at the early days when Sabian wasn't so big and powerful, I could call him up and just pick his brain. I'd study the website. I'd open up all these browsers. I'd put up cymbal setups. I'd study other guys' setups. And what's that sound? And I got super familiar with the entire Sabian catalog. It was really fun. Even Mark said at one of the NAMM shows, he said, you hear things a lot of drummers don't hear. It'd be neat if you could come up to the factory. We've got some sounds I'd like you to listen to. And then you helped me arrange my visit to the factory, which was fantastic. God, that was a mind blow to see how this whole thing's happening.
Well, once you're at the Sabian factory, it really is a money. And I tell everybody, all these people that are listening and that will listen in the future, make a trip up to Canada and the East Coast of Meductic, New Brunswick. Go there, take a tour of the factory because it'll open your mind. And a lot of the cymbals you talked about was what I call BS, before Sabian. AS was after Sabian. So once Sabian came around in the early 80s, they really started to understand sound. So just talk about the cymbals that you have there. I know you got some beautiful Sabians there. Just talk about the cymbals you have there.
Yeah, so I'm using mostly legacy and evolution cymbals. They're just more the sound. I used to use some brighter AAX, but I've gotten into some more complex, earthy, darker tones, probably my jazz influence. So this is a 21-inch legacy ride, which has got the unlaid band on the bottom to drive.
Yeah.
I got a 12-inch evolution splash. This is the 7. And then here is a 17-inch legacy crash, 14-inch legacy hi-hats. And then I have a host of others. I have the Paragon Chide on the left. I'm looking forward to the Urban Ride coming up. I have some 13-inch evolutions on the right, a 19-inch Legacy crash, and then I have the ozone here with a little Mike Portnoy Max splash. So
Yeah.
it's a big palette of colors with a nice scale, and I always try to listen to things. In fact, years ago, I would read about drummers getting sets of cymbals. I thought, why sets, and how cool is that? And then I realized, well, because you want to match them. You want to kind of hear the sonic, the register, the pitch, the decay, the attack, all those characteristics. And so study the website. I tell students, go up and spend some time getting on the website. Build a cymbal setup, pull in a bunch of crashes, compare them. It's going to take you a long time to learn sounds, and there's more and more sounds, and so it's almost overwhelming at this point.
It really is. And the line that you had there, the legacy and the evolution, that's out of the mind of Dave Weckl. I mean, Dave is a brilliant musician. He's a brilliant drummer, but he's really brilliant as far as even engineering and hearing sounds and knowing decibels in interviews, and he hears things so deeply. And the design of the Evolution came out, which was a phenomenal line that came out. I also used one of his Evolution rides, and then he wanted something even thinner, so he took it to the Legacy. So what you have is a lighter sound that just has such a crisp, clean, and when it records, it just sounds so beautiful, as your cymbals always have. That's beautiful, fantastic.
Yeah. My band XC Numbers just got back together, and I was able to test drive them. Well, I think I sent you that link.
Yeah.
I was even blown away. I wasn't really convinced with this ride when I went into that gig, but then when I watched it, I recorded it on my Zoom camera. It's just more as a study, because I always record our performances to learn. I was like, oh, that ride sounds so beautiful. So again, that's the thing where you really have to test drive it, record it, step back and listen to it to really understand how the cymbal sounds in context with the drum set. Because some of my cymbals actually make my drums sound better. It's a weird thing. Just like the clutch on a hi-hat can drastically affect the sound of the cymbal, even the thickness of the stand. So I have these retro bass kind of flush bass stands because they breathe and things have a little more resonation. And I kind of favor a very open melodic tuning, probably more from a jazz background, but it's still contemporary, but it has some of that openness that is traditional to the early drum sounds.
Well, that's fantastic that you hear that. So do you have any, what other books did you have there? Because you had some other stuff that you had put together too,
well,
which I thought
the
very
last one, this is a digital copy only at Hudson Music Right Hand. And this is kind of an extension of this Contemporary Drumming Essentials Volume 1. This is Volume 2. The third one is not yet happening yet.
Right.
The bass drum foot. But what I did is I took some of the hi-hat patterns from the hi-hat foot and some of the more contemporary, like ding, 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 more complex or involved ride patterns, and focused on pairing those with specific hi-hat patterns, but still going through my section of what I call the rhythmids, where you're just displacing the bass drum in all the possible permutations. So you're mechanically covering everything on one page that you're going to do for the rest of the book. They're just blends. And that's another way in which I get students to kind of dissect and analyze things, is look at the connection between what you did here with what's going here. So, so this one, I don't have any students currently at the level where we're really working on this. I give them little samples of it. I was just a really nerdy guy. I went cover through many, many books. I just kind of was the long-haired hippie, and I carried a briefcase and metronome, but I was a rocker. Didn't do so well academically, but did great drumming-wise.
We age differently from that long hair hippie to now the no hair parent, and I hear you, man. It's a whole nother look of what we got.
Never a bad hair day ever.
Now talk about the level of students, because you I mean, beginner, intermediate, or advanced students. How will you approach a beginner student as opposed to an intermediate or an advanced student? How do you deal with that level of change?
It's really connecting with the person, as I mentioned earlier. People first, players second. So we all have our own likes and dislikes, and I really try to connect with what they like. I ask them to just tell me if there's a favorite drummer like, or if a favorite band. We just start with taste. And as I say to my students, if we went to a restaurant, you wouldn't want me deciding what you're going to eat. If we went to the mall, you wouldn't want me deciding what clothes you're going to wear. We all have our own individual tastes. So I really try to tune into helping the student explain to me what they really want to get.
Yeah.
And then I tailor the educational curriculum, if you will, to what they're interested in. Some are very just casual hobbyists. I have very serious students that have gone on to LA Music Academy, North Texas State. I have a student now at Eastman School of Music who was jazz band drummer of America last year. So I kind of help these students get to that level from having this great background with this teacher on the big band stuff. So I really just tailor it. I have a student who's over 80. He's been with me for about 17 years. And he's working through groove essentials, one little groove at a time. And I'm showing how to practice and break things down and analyze the songs. And it's really fun. And my youngest is 6. And so he's just getting into it. And then I have a lot of middle and high school students and a few college level students.
Talk about the level of patience that we must have as educators.
Well, I'm a parent, as you are. And when you're a parent, you develop a level of patience you never knew existed, because there's the statement, you never really grow up to become a parent. And on some levels, parents can relate to that. So for me, I've stopped making it so much about drums, but more about helping use drumming as a focus on self-healing, self-empowerment. If we feel good about ourselves, then we play better. And sometimes if we don't play well, we feel bad about ourselves. And I used to have this sort of confused connection with, just because I didn't play as well as I want doesn't mean there's something wrong with me as a person. And you were a very big influence to me years ago when you spotted that I had some kind of confusion about how I could look at things. And you kind of helped me reframe it by recommending the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. By Stephen Covey. And then I also read your book, which I think you could talk about more, The Cycle of Self-Empowerment. This is what I deal with a lot, is people that want to play the drums. And sometimes they got great talent, but they're really not focused, or there's some personal issues. And I'm not a therapist. I've read a lot of self-help books and I've gone through a lot of life experiences. So I just try to pass on some of the things that I've learned. And I've just grown to be a very, very patient person with my students, because it's really not about me. It's about you. And I'm just going to do what I can to help you get to where you want to go.
Well, it's a great line when you think about it, and that needs to be understood completely. That as educators, our job is to pass on information, but it's absolutely not about us. That student comes in, we've got to lift that student, we've got to help them grow, we've got to help them open their mind, and give them information as far as how they can step into discovering things that they may not have discovered before. So it's almost a level of discovering and uncovering. They want to discover new things and uncover things that might have been there that we want to broaden for them. So that's a pretty powerful philosophy.
Yeah. Well, so many people give up because they don't have enough experience or enough practice strategy tools. So it's like, the way I look at it is that if this method didn't work, let's try this one. So I'm constantly showing students the methods that I developed really on my own, through going through so many books, studying so many videos, reading so many articles, just really paying attention to what these great drummers would do. And a lot of it has to do with just understanding how to set up the instrument properly, which is a confusing thing. And you really don't get it for many years. A lot of guys set up their kit to look like a famous drummer set, whether they can play it or not, that kind of thing. So one of the things I was able to do early on in Seattle area, I was really connected with some of the music stores. One particular store was American Music, and they sponsored these clinics. Like when Dave Weckl first did his first clinic in Seattle, he actually played my drum set because they couldn't get his drum set. So he set it up and tuned it. And it was so different sounding than the way it sounds on the recording. So this was like a whole new realization about the acoustic sound versus the end result of it being processed. But the coolest thing was sitting behind his set. So I sat behind his kit. I sat behind Steve Smith's kit once when he did a clinic, because I knew the guys. They said, sure, go ahead. And then I sat behind Wackel's set after he changed his setup, which was like perfect. I also sat up behind Vinny Colaiuta's drum set at the Baked Potato once. I just snuck up there. I figured they're going to yell at me. At least I can get in there. I learned that, the cymbal's a lot closer than mine. And, I see what they do. Just really paying a lot of attention to those kind of details really changes everything about your playing in the bigger picture. Those are just a few examples that really inspired me to think differently about tuning and setup, which improved my drumming.
Do you do any classes where you sit down and listen to music with the students? Is that a part of the process too?
Absolutely. In fact, I share with them how to listen and how to transcribe. The first thing I do when they want to learn a song, I say, well, we need to understand the entire song's form. So we sit down and we write out a roadmap: the intro, the verse, chorus, pre-chorus, bridge, breakdown, guitar solo, outro, whatever they are. And we come up with labels and how many measures they are. So we really analyze the song structure. Then we go back and say, well, what's the drum beat for the verse now? What's the drum beat for the chorus next, or the bridge, and so on. So when we're deciding what's the drum beat for that song, it's usually more than one. So we'll start with understanding the song's form. Then the student understands why certain beats apply to certain sections of the music. I really try to focus on getting them to think musically as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
I want them to hear the song before they look at any transcription, because we learn to talk before we learn to read. So the most organic and natural method is to observe through sound and sight, and then eventually analyze the symbols like letters,
right.
in this case, notes and rests. So those are some of the ways I go about trying to students understand songs, and then they understand how to transcribe. In fact, I have a class called Hands, Feet, Rhythm, and Beats, Become a Master of Your Drumming, and there's a whole segment in there where we analyze and transcribe songs, song form, transcribe beats, and then transcribe fills. And I walk all the students through how this whole thing works.
Yeah.
So it's
Boy,
exciting.
That really is fantastic. You know, there are several people that have joined on here. Dan Andre, who's a student of mine in the Pennsylvania area, is another wonderful young and up and coming educator, and he's putting some videos out. And he himself also, in our lessons, we would listen to music and go back and really kind of open them up. And he's now playing better than ever before. Nick Cubis, who's another wonderful, fantastically young student of mine that is playing better than ever. He was also a student of Kevin Lehman, who's a phenomenal player. Kevin's going to be involved with Joe on the Send panel tomorrow. So these guys, Claude Hoffman in Belgium, another phenomenal student that sees the art form as a constant learning process. I always see you as that constant student. What drives you?
There's just too many cool things to lay it down.
Yeah.
You know, when I something, it just does this to me, and then I want to go in that direction. I'm not having as many of those kind of pulls at this point. Having studied so many different genres of music and gone through so much material, it's just more fun to sit down and go, I understand what they're doing. I can listen to people and kind of understand the musical thought processes and the phrasing of all these great drummers. So it's more about refining my craft than trying to develop any new particular skills other than becoming a better musician.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. What do you see now, as this pandemic has hit us and we are challenged by having to stay in the confines of our home? Are you discovering any new things? Are you listening to any old music that you haven't heard in a while? Are you always seem to be pushing yourself that way.
Well, I get exposed to the new music through my YouTube channel requests, so that's kind of what's feeding me. Plus, I have a Facebook page I've started called Drum Set Artistry Mastermind, and it's a private group which you're welcome to join it, and it's really an exchange for drummers to have a safe place to share videos, to ask questions, and not feel ridiculed.
Nice,
because that's really the subtitle of the group is where mind, body, and spirit unite to create drumming greatness. And I'm your drum set mind coach. So I really try to make sure that it's very positive. And I have tons of old students on there, and they're sharing videos. And so these are just ways that I can stay connected and communicate with the students.
Boy, that's interesting. Let me see if I can pull this question up. Chris Johnson, who's a phenomenal teacher and educator. He's got a book coming out soon, which will be great. He says, I always turn down younger students. Any tips on how to get started with younger students? Garey, what do you do with younger students?
Treat it more like a kinder music class than a drum lesson. My wife taught kinder music and the music garden classes. And then when I was raising my kids, we did homeschooling. So I was involved with the home education, and then we did music classes, kinder music classes. And so I kind of try to put myself into a different mindset. This kid's interested in drumming, but they're not interested necessarily in studying the drums. They still want to grow and learn and play. So it's more of a childlike approach. So I just really try to get them excited about something, kind of really tune in to what they like, what they don't, really read their facial expressions and kind of tones, and just try to make it exciting. So if they're moving forward, I know they're making progress. And then if they get to that point where they really like it and kind of mature enough, then usually from then it takes off, and we can start working on books, and we can start talking more normal kind of stuff. But I always make sure it's fun. If it's not fun, then they're not going to practice. You're going to practice what you like, not what you don't more, especially when you're young. When you're older, you understand the importance of doing certain things. So you just organize your routine to do the stuff you don't like first. Yeah. The fun is last. So then it's a lot easier to get through your practice routine. So it's more about.
So there's a balance between what you might show on the practice pad as far as hand techniques, what you might show on the drum set. You got to really kind of feel that balance with each student.
Right. I actually ask them, which sound do you like better? And I give them A/B comparisons, and then they just tell me. And then I say, can you try that? So it's really a show and tell kind of an approach, very much more like you would talk to a young child. You're not going to assign them a page out of a book.
Yeah.
So it's really got to be hands-on learning, and it's slower at first. Although I do have one young kid that's very sharp, and he's like kind of unusually sharp for his age. I have this kid, I think he's now in 7th grade, but he was starting to point out stuff in some of the books that I had never noticed before. In fact, he was the guy that showed me the customized speed feature on YouTube I told you about the other day. It's like this little shaver. He's a brilliant kid. He's actually gone through he's working out of my hi-hat foot book.
Oh, that's great.
The preceding book I used to start students on, and then he's working on that. So
that is great. How have you embraced technology in this crazy change now? You know, are you a tech kind of a guy?
I'm getting better at the tech stuff. I mean, I don't have a microphone set up for my drums, and I don't record in here. I go to studios to do that still at this point. I did have a setup BC before children, and then that got sold as I moved back. And I'm toying with the idea of getting into it, but I'm focused more on my band projects, so it's not really important. I don't want to record for clients, that kind of stuff. So what was the question one more time, Dom?
So as far as embracing technology.
Oh, right. So with the technology, here it is. I mean, I just do mostly FaceTime lessons. Skypes are okay, but then the volume of the microphone dims after you play, and you always have to wait a little bit to speak loud, where FaceTime doesn't have that problem. And then with my Facebook group, I use Facebook video. That's also another format.
Right.
Zoom I tried. I'm going to revisit that because the sound for the cymbals is not good. At least it wasn't at the time. And now I understand there might be some audio settings that have improved it.
Yeah.
But it's been really fantastic because I've got my cell phone here and it's run through PA. So I actually can pull up videos and text them to my students. And then we can talk about videos. They send me clips and then I watch them and then I'll transcribe them. This is commonplace with some of my students. Some of the more advanced ones are always sending me recordings of like dirty loops. What's this lick the guy's doing? Intense stuff, which is like, great, let's listen to that. So I use that kind of stuff like that, and it's pretty basic. It works very, very well. I'm hardwired, so I have a better, more stable signal than if I just used Wi-Fi. I think that's helpful.
Yeah.
But pretty much it's my MacBook on my music stand across the room, and then the other thing I do is I swivel the kit around, and over here is my acoustic bass drum set. That's my electric bass drum set, and then this is the one I use for playing straight ahead stuff and big band. So I have the two different kind of sides because I really feel like I can't do everything I want to do on one sounding kit. That's why I always use electric bass versus acoustic bass analogy, because most people understand that.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. You know, it's interesting because now, I mean, there are different formats and different platforms that offer different things. FaceTime is great because if someone has an iPhone or has an iPad or a, MacBook Pro, you can allow FaceTime to come into it. Again, Skype, what I like about Skype, you can record the lesson, so you can press record. Yeah. Zoom does that also. Zoom, you can record and have that happening. And of course, on Zoom, you can go into the audio section, you can go into the advanced, and you can disable certain sounds, so it allows the sound to be better.
That's what I'm going to do. Sure.
Yeah, so when you go in there, you'll see what happens. So, I mean, all of these things, I think we really have to learn as players. We've got to, step up our game to get familiar with what these platforms are at. This is the world we live in right now. This is the 21st century. When I go back to thinking about the mid-'60s when Star Trek first hit, and we saw somebody with a communicator in their hand, and they had that communicator, and he was talking to the ship. I mean, we said, my gosh, can you imagine how cool that would be to have a little phone like that you can call people? Well, we're there. Yes. We are there at the world where we at. Same thing on Star Trek when they said, computer, what's the distance between the Earth to the moon? And the computer would give that information. Siri and Alexa are my two new girlfriends now.
Careful, Dom.
I'm talking to them all the time. My wife says, who are you talking to? No big deal. I was just, speaking to Alexa. I mean, we have to learn and welcome this stuff, but we'll use it too. Sometimes if we want information, how many ounces are in 3 quarts of what? Alexa, how many ounces? What's, and it just spits back the information. So we're living in that time that we have to embrace this technology and use it for our advantage. Garey, could we have imagined that you can Google information on someone immediately and understand that, or pull up music online, go to YouTube and type in Buddy Rich and have 3,000 videos to choose from? Could we have ever imagined that?
No, it would have been nice. We had the records and you're holding your thumb on it and nickeling and just doing everything to try to figure things out. Now you can slow stuff down, take out parts. It's like, God, yeah, it's cool.
It really was different. We were rubbing two pieces of freaking wood together to start fire. That's where we were at trying to learn. So I tell this next generation, you have now some great tools to push yourself to this next level. You have these great tools to go. All these great drummers that are on here, man, Mike, Dave Lewitt, another phenomenal player that's here. Sean Hughes, you know, all these great players that are here. You know, my gosh. Oh, Corrado Adriana, fantastic. Diego Sanchez. Look at these players that are here right now listening. All of you guys. Scott Kinnison, great players that are here taking this into. We are this next generation of what's happening with the future of modern drum set. The teachers are the backbone. Felipe Drago had mentioned that also in the comment section. The teachers are the future of what this growth of the industry will be. Give me some last closing comments. What would you say to all these different people for them to understand more about education here on Sabian's Facebook page?
Well, I'd say get both hard copy and digital copies of your books. The nice thing, of course, the snail mail hard copy is great. I got discs, you got all that stuff, but you have to go through that whole process of loading, downloading, and students won't do it. What's so cool about the online education, especially at Hudson Music, is that there's a red and a blue tab. You click one, you got the audio MP3 track that immediately plays, and you're looking at the text, and then you've got the blue one, you click it, you got a video coming on, and so you can watch the example. It's just instantaneous. So it's very convenient to speed up the learning process, because sometimes when things have to be loaded into a disk or a computer, people won't do it. We get too busy, too many steps. So I'm old school. I like the book on the stand. I still love that. I think it's important. You can write notes in it and check things off and stay organized. But having like this book where you can immediately watch the audio and video tracks and then be looking at the chart at the same time is huge.
Yeah.
So that's one of the keys to really speeding things up, and recording yourself. I really try to get them to do that. In fact, they'll play and they don't know it, but I'll hold up the camera and I'll record them through the computer. And I go, how do you think that sounded? And they'll go, oh. I go, well, let's check it out. And then I'll play it. And I have a nice big PA system so they can actually hear it very clearly, or hear where it comes. And then they can watch themselves. And so I say record yourself and use the digital online educational services that you can get with these books at Hudson Music. That's really going to be helpful.
It really is fantastic. And HudsonMusic.com, they now have all of the works of Alfred, stick control, accents and rebounds, syncopation. All these books now are digitally available. All the Hal Leonard books that they have now, they've got that on there too. New Breed and Morello's books and all these great modern drummer publication books that are up there. I tell everybody, boy, get involved with what's happening with education. It is totally fantastic. Garey, you have been great. Next week at the same time on Thursday at 2 o'clock, I'm going to have Maxim Dioman, who is a phenomenal drummer from Kiev, Ukraine. A great player, a great teacher. I'm going to have him on here. He's joining us right now, so we'll be able to sit down and listen to Maxim's overviews of what he's doing. He does workout sessions on Zoom every morning with about 50, 60 students practicing. All these new ideas are fantastic to have. Thank you so much. Thank you to Sabian so much for allowing us to have this time on their Facebook page to bring this information and share this with the world. It's so great. This goes on into their feed that people can watch this later on. This is so exciting. Joe Bergamini, thank you so much, who's managing the Sabian Education Network program, who keeps the energy going. He's into it. He's on fire. He's enthusiastic. He's creating an opportunity for all of us to have this incredible reach. Sabian has a vision for education that is absolutely leading the community. So I say, everybody, support the company like Sabian that allows us to do this and continue on. Garey, you've done great. Much luck to you. Thank you so much. And at some point, we'll touch base real soon, all right?
Sounds great. Thank you, Don, for having me. Thanks, Sabian. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Garey. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.